Joe Dittmar has agreed to speak to us today, and his story is amazing. You know, we've had different types of speakers here at Nickel Jesus. We've had guitar players and airplane pilots and all kinds of good speakers, all right? But I've been searching all year for someone with a good, true experience, a story that they can share that they lived and that we can learn from. And it so happens that we were really searching, and Joe's name came across an email that I was looking at, and I got on his website, and I was doing some research, and he spoke in town here twice that very day. And it just so happens it was just after he finished his second speech. So I didn't even get to go see him live. But Joe's a special guy. In just the few minutes that I've got to share with him here, eating lunch and all, I know he has a real passion for what he's going to share with you today. He's been in the insurance business for 35 years. And I guess, well, you're from Pennsylvania originally, and you've been in Chicago, and now he's in the big town of UNC Chapel Hill. Can I get a woo-woo? I'm just kidding. No, we can start a fight with that, okay? But now he's from Chapel Hill, and he's working there at an insurance, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but he's working there at a group in Chapel Hill. But his special story, you might think, well, what is he doing here? We don't like insurance people anyway. What's he doing at our conference? He's got a real story to tell. He was in the second World Tower on 9/11 when the plane hit. Okay, so I'm not going to steal his thunder, but he's going to come share a story about a date with destiny. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, hell, they don't want you using this. Okay, I see. The steps are on the other side. I'm going to start at the podium only because I can hide these notes and you'll think I'm just doing this completely and totally off the cuff. Wouldn't that be great? Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I first of all want to give a word of thanks to Jason for allowing and affording me the opportunity to present here at the Nickel Jesus Fall Symposium. Whoever told me don't call it Nickel Jesus or don't call it Nickel Geezer, I didn't do that, okay? I know this is an important event each year for a group that arguably has the hardest acronym to pronounce and to spell. Seriously, though, again, thank you for this very awesome opportunity. Your organization's mission is written as follows. Its mission is to improve the efforts of local governments in North Carolina to plan, design, program, implement, and operate information systems with a common goal of strengthening North Carolina communities through the appropriate use of information technology. Why is that so important? Because knowledge is power. And the power to make appropriate decisions ultimately decides the success or failure of any action, of any venture, of any group, and of any person. Decisions are truly the key to everything we do, and it's organizations like yours that help shape the decisions of many people and many organizations in many places. Coming here to this seminar was a conscious decision, one of the many that you make every day in order to move ahead in your career and in your life. Our life is full of decisions, some big, some small, some instant, some well thought out. Decisions are critical, and your ability to make those decisions is central to your performance. The information that you bring to the decision-making process affects the process in many ways more important than you would have ever have thought. It's what you know, who you know, and how confident you are in those sources that make the decision possible, for right or for wrong. Sometimes you're thrust into the role of leader, and you aren't even sure how you got there. But in the end, you're forced to make a decision that can have a dramatic effect on many others. And when you're at that point, it's one thing to have resource, data, information, background, but sometimes there is no resource, no information, and you need to make a decision with your gut feel because you are completely clueless. You can't go with the flow because there is no flow to go with. Now that is decision making with a twist. And so, okay, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, what makes this guy some kind of expert at decision making? Is it the fact that I've become a fairly successful insurance guy for a billion-dollar corporation making million-dollar choices and decisions daily? Or does it lie in the wisdom of asking my very best friend in the world to marry me 34 years ago? Or is it the ability to help raise 4 kids and guide them all to receiving full academic scholarships to college? Well, these things are proof of something, maybe a little bragging, but perhaps not decision-making. Rather, I think my decision-making expertise was tried, tested, and galvanized on September 11, 2001. You see, as has been mentioned, I was on the 105th floor of 2 World Trade Center, the South Tower, when the events of that day began to unfold. And my ability to be here today to relate all this to you is testament to making solid decisions. So I thought I'd share my story so that you can see how the decisions of many affected that day. As was mentioned, I'm in the dreaded insurance business. I've been that for 35 years. I'm going to age myself a little bit. I'm a graduate of Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hey, an owl? Is there an owl in here? That's good. Hoot hoot. Do you know how rare that is? And I went to school. I was a radio and television communications major. This is the part that'll age me. I was going to graduate school and be a disco DJ. That's what I was going to be. Okay? That was my calling. That was my life. But my dad was in the business. His dad was in the business, and my great-grandfather was in the business. I didn't have a chance. I wanted a real job. I wanted to make real money, and I got into the insurance industry after I graduated. And if you know a little bit about the insurance industry, one of the things you would realize or remember is that the World Trade Centers were somewhat of a mecca for the insurance industry. Virtually every insurance organization in the country, probably in the world, had offices there at the Trade Center. So it wasn't unusual for a guy in my position to be asked to attend a meeting at the World Trade Center. In August of 2001, Mary Wieman, extremely powerful woman at Aon Corporation, one of our brokers, called me. And she asked me to attend a meeting the following month at the Trades in New York. I didn't want to go to Mary's meeting. I had the chance to go to another type of insurance meeting, the type of meeting that involves aluminum or titanium sticks about this long, little metal heads on the end, little white balls in the grass, and you go like this. That was the meeting that I wanted to attend. But Mary did to me in that phone call what every woman has been doing to me since the day I was born. She threw good old-fashioned Catholic guilt down on my head and said, "Sure, Joe, no problem. That's all right. Nobody from your company will be there to represent. That's okay. I'm sure your boss won't mind. I'm sure it won't be a big deal that you'll be the only ones that are out." I said, "Mary, stop. I'll be there. My dad preceded me in the business, and my dad was my mentor, my hero. And he taught me something, and it came to practice at that very moment. He used to teach me, plan your work your plan. And so that's exactly what I did. I said, okay, I want to try to do this whole thing. I want to be able to go to that other meeting, but go to her meeting and make everybody happy. So that's exactly what I did. I made a plan and made it work. I went back to Philadelphia on the Friday before the Tuesday to see my mom and dad, to visit them in the house that I grew up in as a kid. And on Saturday, I went to see my sister and visit with her. I don't do that enough even to this day. On Sunday, I went to the Eagles-Rams football game with my son. You know, that's interesting. My son's 33 years old, I still pay for the tickets, and he sits in the seats. What a good deal. What a great deal. We went to the game together, and it's interesting because my son, he's a few inches shorter than me, but in much greater shape than I can be. And he thinks he's kind of a macho guy. He works for Valero Oil in the Deep Port in South Jersey, and he walks the pipeline. So he's real macho. And it was really interesting because here we are at that game, and we're walking out of the game, and we're walking across this big giant parking lot in Philadelphia, and here's this kid, Mr. Tough Guy, and he gives me this big hug. And he kind of whispers in my ear, I miss you, Dad. And I pushed him back a little bit, and I could see a little tear rolling out of his eyes. And, I knew he wasn't crying because of the game. The Eagles beat the Rams. Everybody beats the Rams, okay? I guess it was a pretense of what was about to occur, and we just didn't know it. And he got in his truck, and I got in my car, and I drove down to South Jersey to the Marriott Resort in Absecon, New Jersey, Seaview Country Club. And on Monday morning, woke up and had that meeting and had a real nice lunch right after the round, had a real business meeting on Monday afternoon, and then we were going to have the notorious insurance dinner on Monday night. I say notorious because I'm sure this doesn't happen in your world, but in the insurance industry, dinners like this start and they never end. They just go on forever and ever. And I thought, guys, listen, I can't do that tonight because I had a plan. And I want to get to bed early, and this was my plan. If you've ever been to New York, the one thing that you do know is that you don't want to drive into New York if you don't have to. The traffic is just absolutely horrendous. And I wasn't about to do that. I was going to get up early, and that's exactly what I did. I got up early on Tuesday morning in South Jersey, 3:30 in the morning, drove back to Philadelphia to Penn Station, Amtrak. I was going to take the Metroliner into New York City. That was the way I was going to fly, and I was going to avoid the traffic. And that's exactly what I did. Got into 30th Street Station at about 5:30 a.m., bought my round-trip ticket. The train pulled in at 6 a.m., ran down the steps, got into the car, found a nice seat, took off my suit coat, took off my backpack. I don't carry a briefcase, carry a backpack. Took out my laptop, turned it on, sat down, and did what all of us insurance execs do at 6 a.m. in the morning on the Metroliner with our laptops on the way to New York. I fell asleep. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. It was 6 a.m., and off we went. And we were about 2/3 of the way up to New York City when my cell phone rang. And I feel good with a group like this as I'm watching a couple people tick away here. Y'all get the idea of how cell phones have changed our entire way of life. We're always connected. We're always on. We're always working, right? But back in the day, where's the guy that just retired? He remembers back in the day, okay? Back in the day, when you went on a trip like this, you had to have an itinerary. You had to have a plan. It was written down on a piece of paper. It told you what your hotel room was, what hotel you were staying at, what your room number was, what the phone number was to the hotel, where you were having your meetings, what time you'd be at those meetings. And if you remember, you took your AT&T long-distance card because, God forbid, you were going to pay for those long-distance calls. I mean, you had to have a plan. Now, with cell phones, wherever you are, that's where you'll be. Just hit me up on the cell phone. It's no big deal. Just call me. And this was no different in 2001. Before this trip, I had said to my wife, look, I'm going to Philly on Friday night, visiting the fam. I've got a meeting on Tuesday night in New York. I'll be back Tuesday night. Love you. It's basically all I told her. That's it. And so here I am on that train, and I'm fast asleep, and the cell phone rings. And I answered, hello, I was asleep, okay? And it was my wife, and she said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up. I said, no, that's okay. The train's about to pull into Newark, and I got to get off. And she said, Newark? I thought you said you were going to New York. And I said, yeah, but it's a lot easier to get into the World Trade Center, which is where I'm going, if I take the PATH train from Newark, because the PATH train stops right underneath the Trade Center. So it's a direct shot. So that day, I told my wife exactly where I was going to be. And I got off that train dutifully with thousands of other New Jerseyans and made my way to the path and on my way and into New York. And when I got to the World Trade Center, I was going into 2 World Trade Center, the South Tower. And when I walked up from the underground and into the lobby, the security people at the World Trade Center were incredibly good. They had this knack of seeming to know who did and who didn't belong in a building that maybe houses as many as 25,000 people. But they recognized who was and they recognized who wasn't. And I walked into that lobby and the guy kind of looked at me and he gave me a wave. And I followed him over to the security desk. Security was tight in that building because of the 93 bombing. So it was good. And he calls me over and they take my picture electronically. And they transfer that picture onto a little white plastic card. And on that plastic card was my name, the company that I was visiting, the floor that I was going to, 105, how long the card was for, it was good until September 12th, 2001, and a barcode. And the barcode was the most important thing that was on that card. Not just because it contained all that information that I had just mentioned, but because that barcode was the way that you would swipe your way through the electronic turnstiles that separated you from the elevator banks. Both buildings were identical. Both buildings were 110 stories high. The 110th floor in the North Tower was the Windows of the World restaurant. The 110th and the 106th floors in the South Tower were observation decks. The other floors from 105 on up in either building were heating, ventilation, air conditioning, elevator equipment, elevator cabling, no human beings. We were going to make our way to 105 in the South Tower, the highest occupied level of the building at that point in time. Unfortunately, the Windows of the World restaurant in the North Tower was open that morning. It was too early for the observation decks to be open in the South. And when you swipe your way through these electronic turnstiles, you had to make a choice in either building. There was a bank of elevators to the right that serviced the 1st through the 77th floors, and then there was another bank of elevators to the left that went on an express basis to the 78th floor, the sky lobby level of the building. That's what it was called, the second lobby in the building, the sky lobby level. And then you would go up to 78 and then get off and get onto another set of elevators that would service all the floors up till 110. And that's exactly what we did. Expressed up to 78, got off, went up to 105, and when we got off at 105, there was Mary Weeman, the woman that I had mentioned earlier that had called me to have this meeting. And it was kind of a surreal moment, because here's this extremely powerful insurance person, and in her one hand, she has a rag, and in the other hand, a spray bottle of Murphy's Oil soap. Now, Mary was not Susie Homemaker by any stretch of the imagination, but this was how important this whole meeting was to her. She wanted everything perfect, right down to the furniture in the interior conference room that she was going to lead us to. We were in an inside conference room, a room semi-similar to this, about a quarter of the size of this room, 4 walls, no windows, 1 set of doors. 54 people escorted into that room. The meeting was supposed to commence at 8:30. I don't know about your world, but there has never been an insurance meeting that has ever started on time. And this day was no different. And 8:30 came and went with everybody drinking their Starbucks and kibitzing about their family and talking about kids' soccer or doing whatever, okay? And at 8:48, the lights flickered. That's it. Just a flicker of lights. We didn't hear anything. We didn't see anything. We didn't feel anything. Just a flicker of lights. Almost immediately, a guy by the name of Rick Blood from the Aon Corporation came crashing into the room, and he said, "Hey, there's been an explosion in the North Tower, and we got to evacuate." 54 intelligent human beings, all in the same place, all at the same time, and we all did the same exact thing. We're fine. It's New York. Shit happens in New York. Let us have our meeting. We'll be just fine. And Rick kind of looked at us, and he had a forlorn look in his face, and he said, no, you don't understand. I'm a volunteer fire marshal for the 105th, 104th, 103rd floors, and I can't leave until everybody leaves, and I want to leave. And I know he got everybody out of that room that day because I was the last guy out. And he escorted us all to the nearest fire stairwell on the 105th floor and proceeded to tell us that we were going to walk down 105 flights of steps. Oh yeah, what a bunch of happy campers at that moment. And everybody did the almost identically and almost at the same time, the same thing. They all reached into their pocket or their left or their right hip, and they pulled out their cell phone. At that time, you had to flip them. I hope none of you have a flip phone anymore, but anyhow. Everybody pulled these things out, flipped them, did whatever they had to do to activate them, and something really, really interesting happened on the way to their cell phone. They were going to call somebody to moan and groan about the fact they couldn't have their meeting, right? Something really interesting happened. They didn't work. The main cell tower for all of southern Manhattan was on top of the North Building, the first building to be hit. So cell service was virtually interrupted at that particular point in time. And this is a group of extremely intelligent, highly technology-minded people. That's a hard word to say. And I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, my God, well, okay, so why don't you get on a landline? Logical. Except that everybody in New York City is now calling out to their mom, dad, sister, brother, aunt, uncle, lover, whatever, to let them know that they were okay. And everybody in the world, and that is not a stretch, folks, everybody in the world that knows somebody in New York City is now trying to call into New York to find out whether mom, dad, sister, brother, aunt, uncle are okay. Landlines were overmatched, couldn't handle the traffic. Cell service, virtually gone. If you've served this great country in the armed services, you know the first thing you do when you attack the enemy, cut the lines of communications. And that's exactly what occurred that morning. So now you've got 54 Type A insurance people standing there with cell phones that don't work. So now they're doubly pissed about the fact that they can't call to moan and groan about what's going on at this particular point in time. Everybody was perturbed, and I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, well, geez, didn't you guys understand what was going on? And that's just the point. Each and every one of you knew way more what was going on outside and inside those buildings than any of us that were right there. We had no clue. Not a clue. So they tell us to get into the fire stairwell and proceed to walk down. If you've ever been in a high-rise building, anything over 5 stories actually, and you've been in a fire stairwell, you would see that as you're going down the steps, the system works the same every place. The doors automatically close in the case of an emergency. They're on magnets. They automatically close. They don't lock. And to the right or to the left or on the back of the door inside the fire stairwell is a sign that says something to the effect of, once you're in here, stay here until the lobby level. Don't get out except at the lobby level. And I know those signs exist because some insurance geek is responsible for those signs. That's a life safety. That's a fire safety issue, okay? And so we saw all that, and we got down to the 90th floor, and the door to the 90th floor out of the fire stairwell is propped open. And everybody is filing out of the fire stairwell onto the 90th floor. But I'm in the fire insurance business. How ironic is that? I'm in the fire insurance business, and I know better, right? Let me ask you a question. How many of you have or have had kids between the ages of 13 and 18 years old? It's not a quiz, just a show of hands, right? Okay. Everybody across the room, right? And when you told them in that age period that they would absolutely, positively not do something, what did they do? They did it. Amen. You probably did too. Well, guess what? You could be 45 and think you're smart and be just as dumb. I followed everybody out onto that 90th floor, and that's where I experienced probably the worst 30, 40 seconds of my life. Never seen anything like that, and I hope to never ever see anything like that again. I looked out those windows to the north tower, and you see these huge, gaping black holes through the sides of the building. Gray and black billows of smoke pouring out of those holes. Huge gray and black billows of smoke and flames redder than any red I had ever seen before, licking up the sides of the building and beyond the roof level. And if you remember, it was a crystal clear September day that day. And I remember being able to see through that smoke and that fire and into those holes and seeing the fuselage of a large plane lodge inside that building. And I remember immediately thinking to myself, my God, how did the pilot miss that building? And the fact of the matter was, he didn't miss. He didn't miss. And to see all that, and to see furniture, paper, people being pulled out of the building against their will, it was an unbelievable, gruesome, awesome sight. People on that 90th floor seemed to be frozen, whether frozen in fear, mesmerized by what they saw, but they didn't seem to be able to move. I looked at this and I knew this wasn't a made-for-TV movie. This wasn't an Xbox game. This was reality. And I was afraid. I was afraid. I remember having two feelings take over my being almost immediately. The first, a very honest one because of where I'm from. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia, and I had the good fortune of being taught by the good sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary through my first 8 years of my schooling. And I remember 8th grade boys' religion on a Friday afternoon before a New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles weekend, and that's a big deal in Philadelphia, okay? And I remember Sister Joseph looking at us, and she's in boys' religion. You know, that's how they did it back then. Boys' religion was separate from girls' religion. That worked out well. But she said, boys, you got to remember, you got to love God. You got to love your neighbor. But I think it's okay to hate New York. And God, at that minute did I hate New York with every part of my being. And a more honest feeling took over my being almost immediately. One that's much more honest, one much more true, and one that each and every one of you have had. Yes, gentlemen, even you, whether it was today, a week ago, a decade ago, it doesn't matter. You've all had it. That pit of your stomach, I want my mommy feeling. I just wanted to go home. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to go home. And I turned around to leave. And as I turned around, Lud Picaro from the Zurich Insurance Company, this huge, hulking man, he had been an All-American middle linebacker at University of Pittsburgh. So this guy's huge. I almost knocked him over because I was in such a hurry, this big guy. But he put his meaty paws on my shoulders, and he said, "What you going to do, man?" I said, "I'm getting the hell out of here. What are you going to do?" And he said, "You know what? I think that's a good idea, but before I go, I'm going to go to the restroom." That simple decision to use the men's room cost Lud his life that day. That simple decision. I got to the top of the fire stairwell at 90, and they started making an announcement over the PA system that maybe some of you have heard about, read about. And the announcement went something to the effect of, the event has been contained to the North Tower. The South Tower is considered safe. We suggest that if you work in the South Tower, you return to your workstations. If you are a visitor, we suggest that you stay where you are until further notice. And if you feel you need to leave, please proceed with caution. I'm doing this presentation for 12 years, and if I don't hear it, I see it in the eyes and the looks of some people, and I saw it again today. I know there are some going, my God, how could they make an announcement like that? But think about this. There are as many as 25,000 people in both buildings, so maybe as many as 50,000 people in the area. Somebody in the South Tower is in charge of building security, some woman or man. They're down at the lobby level, and at this point in time in the event, they got a cop on one side, they got a firefighter on the other side, and they're looking at this person saying, where are you going to put them? It's raining concrete, steel, and bodies outside. Where are you going to put them? What are you going to do? In our building, the elevators were going up and down, the power was on, ventilation, air conditioning was all working. I'm sure that person thought, wait a minute, let's all stay put. Let's figure out what's going on. Who would have thought that within 18 minutes the same exact thing would happen in our building? Who would have thought? Now, for me, I was leaving. I had no hesitation about leaving. I wasn't even thinking about being too careful. And if you think about, okay, can you run down those steps? They're switchback steps, right? Back, forth, back, forth. You can't run because, just the momentum will take you into the wall at the end of each stairwell. So you kind of get the skip thing going, and you're moving along and hoping for the best. And we got down to that 78th floor, that sky lobby level that I had mentioned before. And there's Mary Weeman again. And she's in front of me. She looks back and she screams, "Joey, Joey, Joey!" The only other people in the world that call me Joey are my old Polish aunts. "Joey, Joey, I am not walking down 78 flights of steps in these shoes. I'm taking the elevator." She was using a New York word that I'm sure you never use here in North Carolina. But that was Mary. Extremely powerful leader. Powerful leader. And I see Al Kappelman from the Liberty International Insurance Company, a volunteer firefighter, in fact, the captain of his fire company out on Long Island, following Mary to the elevator. I see Dave Carlone, executive vice president for Factory Mutual Insurance Company, the best, the finest fire insurance company in all the world, following Mary to the elevator. And finally, some common sense took over my brain. And I thought to myself, building, state of duress. I know it's not our building, but I don't think you should get in an elevator. And I kind of looked at Mary. I gave her that kind of a wave. And I turned around, and I went back to the stairwell. Arguably the best decision I've made in what is still my life, because I was somewhere between the 75th and the 72nd floor when the second plane plowed into our building. That plane went through our building on an angle between the 78th and the 82nd floor. We were just a few floors below the strike zone. I have never felt anything like that before in my life. That fire stairwell that we were inside, that concrete bunker, that thing started to shake back and forth so violently, back and forth, back and forth. I'm not an engineer. I don't know what the angles were, but it shouldn't have been like this. And it's shaking back and forth, and the concrete spidering out, the handrails breaking away from the wall, the fire retardant material coming down on us like snow, and we feel the steps underneath our feet undulating like waves in the ocean, and this heat ball blows by. We smell this jet fuel, and this thing is just rocking and rolling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it finally stops and comes to. And you would think that there would be this massive pandemonium. And yet in that stairwell, there was nothing at that moment but a stunned silence. I've been doing this presentation for 12 years. I had the good chance before the first anniversary to work with the people from USA Today and ABC News. And I learned something at that time that I always mention at this point in the presentation. Just the heat generated by the friction of the plane through the building. Just the heat generated by the friction of the steel through the steel. No fire, no explosion, just that heat was over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. All those people on the 78th floor, hundreds, maybe 1,000 people on the 78th floor, literally did not know what hit them. They were killed instantly. And for them, it was a blessing, because for them, there was no pain. No pain. For those of us that were by, it became kind of a surreal moment. Conjecture game took over. We didn't think a plane went through our building. We knew there was a plane in the other building. We thought maybe a fuel cell exploded. That's why we smelt that jet fuel. That's why we got the rocking. We didn't understand. We all tried for our cell phones again, and thank God they didn't work. It was a blessing for those things not to work at that moment, because at that point, ignorance truly was bliss. What we didn't know didn't hurt us at that particular point in time. And we got a chance to see something that none of us get the chance to see as much as we'd like to. And that is the goodness of human nature, the strength of human nature. People are good. And people want to be good. If you're a teacher or have been a teacher, you know the old saying, 5% of the kids cause 95% of the problems. That's true in life. And here we are at this crisis moment. Everybody knows it's something. Nobody knows exactly what it is. And everybody helps everybody else. Guys just like you and me, helping people that were on crutches, people that were in chairs, people that were just overweight, people that were just scared, people that didn't know what to do. We all became teammates, and we all coached and coaxed each other down the steps. That's what you do. The goodness took over. And we started to make our way down those steps. And some of the observations as we were going down those steps were almost comical. For instance, at one place, in one time, I have never seen so many pairs of women's shoes. Now, you think about it, you're 70 flights of steps above ground and you're in 3 or 4 inch heels, as they say in New York, forget about it, okay? Hey, if you wanted a new laptop computer, that was your day. There was more electronic equipment inside that fire stairwell than in a bankrupt Circuit City store. I mean, there were backpacks, overcoats, briefcases, bags of food, you name it, stuff just ditched to the side. And egress was fine. Everybody was heading in the right direction. You could go 3, 4 wide, and everybody's making their way down, and everything's pretty copacetic until the 35th floor. And that's the chance we had for the first time to encounter the police, the firefighters, and paramedics from New York City and the Port Authority. Just the looks in their eyes told a story. Just the looks in their eyes. They knew. They knew. They knew that they were going up those steps to fight a fire that they couldn't beat. They knew that they were going up those steps to try to save lives that they couldn't save. They knew that they were marching into the bowels of hell, and they knew that they were going up, and they knew that they were never coming back. They knew. They knew. I ask you, could you be that brave? Could you be that strong? Right at that same time, there was a guy who was walking along with us just to my left. He was clearly a maintenance guy from the building. He had a brown shirt, blue yoke, name tag over the pocket, a name that I never got. And he had been following us along. And he had with him arguably one of the most annoying inventions God ever allowed us to create, the Nextel phone with the walkie-talkie feature. And this thing had been amazingly quiet the entire time down. And just at that point, on 35, when we saw these firefighters and police and paramedics, this thing started to belch and beep and make all kinds of electronic noise. And we hear this voice scream out, "We're on 82, we can't get down, we don't know what we're going to do." And this guy, he's right to my left, he stops dead in his tracks. And he spins and turns around. I looked at him, I said, "What are you going to do, man?" And he looked at me and he said, "I don't know, but I got to save my friend." I submit to you, that nameless maintenance man, that is a true American hero. That man who was willing to lay down his life to save that of a friend. He is someone that should always be remembered, never forgotten. I can only hope that the firefighters, the cops turned that man around that day and made him leave the building. We continued our way down, and we were at about the 18th floor when we heard the next guy we encountered that day, and he was on the 15th floor. We heard him on 18 because he had an electronic bullhorn, a megaphone. And he was singing through this thing at the top of his lungs in a voice that only a mother could love on payday. I mean, this guy was William Hung revisited. And he's singing "God Bless America," and he doesn't even know all the words. But by the time we caught up to him, we knew what he was doing. You remember the story of the Titanic, right? The boat hits the iceberg, it's sinking. The captain tells the musicians, get on the deck, play music, keep them calm, get them off the boat. And that's exactly what this guy was doing that day. He went up, he knew he had to be making everybody relax and laugh a little bit with his bad singing and his lack of memory. And I wonder how many lives that man saved that day while giving up his own. I wonder. We got down to the lobby level. You look out these arching glass windows to the left and the right, and you see what appear to be the vestiges of war. Crumbled concrete, twisted steel, and red blotches on the ground, and you knew what those red blotches were. And so you couldn't get out at the ground level. They couldn't let us out on the street level at that particular point in time. So they take us down into the concourse level, underground. You go down escalators, no longer escalating, and that's the chance we had to see for the first time people in real severe need. People with gaping wounds, missing limbs, true blood and gut stuff. And that human nature I mentioned before, that takes over. You want to reach out. You want to try to help. And you couldn't that day. There were so many firefighters, police, paramedics that day. So many there to aid and assist those that needed help. So those that needed help were getting the help they needed. And those of us that were okay, we were on our own. And the herd mentality takes over. And you hope that somebody at the front of your herd knows what they're talking about. You're in this rat maze of a concourse with corridors that go every which way, with stores like any major mall that you've ever seen, with a gigantic train station, and with signs that only mean something to you if you're a New Yorker. 1, 2, 3, 4, red, blue, green, yellow, uptown, downtown, Bronx, Manhattan. You have no idea. And I hear this guy at the front of our herd, and he screams, we want to get to the northeastern end of this complex. It's the furthest away from the building. And my internal GPS said, yeah, you know what? That sounds right. I'm following him. And we're making our way through those corridors, through that rat maze, and we're about ready to hang a left to get into that northeastern end of the complex. And there it is, ladies and gentlemen, Starbucks. And it is open. And there are people in line. I kid you not. I kid you not. Now, I am a card-carrying member of the Starbucks Nation, okay? But I don't know how much double, triple cappuccino or whatever it is people need at that particular point in time. But it goes to show you that even in a moment of great crisis, even the greatest minds aren't where they should be. We got up to the northeastern end of that complex, and once again, we've got escalators that are going to now take us up to the ground level, and they're not escalating anymore, and I'm about halfway up, and I hear, Joe, Joe, Joe. I turn around, and it's my friend David Duffy. David Duffy is arguably the smartest human being I know. David Duffy was and continues to be my treaty reinsurance broker. I've known David for as long as I've been in the business. Now, let me explain that for the non-insurance types, okay? If you think insurance companies take all the bet, you would be wrong. Insurance companies lay off a good portion of that bet through a reinsurance treaty. David's my reinsurance treaty broker. He's my bookie. That's what this man is. And I'm giving him millions and millions of dollars of my company's money every year to protect the company. Smartest guy I know. And I turn around and there's Duffy, and I said, my God, Duffy, what are you doing here? And I stopped myself. I said, that's right, you work in the building. Wait, you work on 54? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, I was on 105. You're behind me. You were on 54. Why are you behind me? You don't want to know, man. I said, oh, yeah, I want to know. And he kind of pauses for a minute. He says, well, I was about halfway down when I realized that we might not get in the office tomorrow. And I'm in charge of the Yankees tickets for the office. The smartest man in the world that I know went back up 25 flights of steps to get the Yankees tickets. Now, I could understand if they were Tar Heels tickets, but Yankees tickets, my God. Once again, not always the greatest thoughts by the greatest minds. But fate was at work at that moment. There was a reason for this. Him and I got up to the street level together, and they're plowing back everything, and I mean everything, with bobcat bulldozers, and it's a gruesome sight. And every uniform that's there is screaming at us, run, 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 don't stop, don't stop. And you get across the street, and you're at Trinity Church, and you stop. You have your Sodom and Gomorrah moment. You turn around, you look at these two hulking buildings in a total state of duress, this ticker tape of concrete, steel, and bodies. And Duffy looked at me and he said, what are you going to do, man? I said, I was supposed to get back on a train, go to Philly, get in a rental car, drive to the Philly airport, fly back to Chicago, where I was living at that time. I said, I don't think that's going to happen. He said, no. He said, and my wife, she works in the North Tower, 40th floor. I haven't heard from her. I want to get home. You come with me. I said, okay. Where do you live? 117th Street, Upper West Side. I said, wow, that's a long walk. He said, we got no choice, man. Let's do it. And we started to make our way north, and we were 8 blocks north, 8 minutes, short blocks in that section of southern Manhattan, and we come across a commercial laundry, doors thrown wide open, WINS, the all-news radio station, blaring out that this was an on-purpose terrorist attack, and our jaws just dropped to the ground. We said, this can't happen here, not here. This can't happen here. But the next couple of sounds that we heard are the sounds that stick with all of us to this day. It's the first thing I hear in the morning, last things I hear at night. First, the unmistakable sound of the twisting steel and the crumbling concrete of what once was the South Tower, the building that we had been in just 8 minutes earlier, coming to the ground. And almost immediately, the blood-curdling sound, the gruesome sound of millions of people all on the streets of New York, all screaming the same scream, all at the same time. We were fortunate. Duffy had a friend that lived in the Tribeca section of the city where we were at, and we were able to get into Meredith's flat, and we proceeded to do what all of you were doing. We watched TV and tried to make sense of what was going on. And we were at about the 5th hour or so of this watching and trying to understand when one of the true American heroes of that day, no matter what your politics are, one of the true American heroes of that day, the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, he got on the TV and he started to speak, and it felt like he was personally speaking to each and every one of us. And he looked out and he said, New York, I know this has been a bad day, but we are New Yorkers, we are tough, we are going to get through this. And I know all of you just want to get home. Do you remember those pictures, folks? Remember the pictures of the people walking across the George Washington Bridge to get home to New Jersey? People walking out the Long Island Expressway to get out to the island. So Giuliani says, I know you just want to get home. And we believe we've mustered enough confidence in our uniforms. And we are going to reopen the subways. Reopen the subways. What an incredible decision to make. Duffy looked at me. He didn't hesitate. He said, come on, we're going, man. I said, where? He said, we're going to the subway. We're going to my place. I said, Midtown Manhattan, Empire State Building. I mean, should we do that? He said, we'll be all right. We'll be all right. And we got over to the closest train station, got on the second train that pulled in. We went up 2 stops, 32nd Street, Penn Station, Amtrak. We had seen on the TV that Amtrak was doing a hell of a job that day, bringing as many empty trains as they could in from New Jersey and getting as many people out of Dodge as they could. And he knew that, Duffy knew that, I knew that, and we looked at each other, and we didn't say any words, and we both got off the train together. And we walked into Penn Station and absolutely looked like a couple of tourists. And we're kind of looking around and wandering around, and there's this woman from Amtrak in her finest New York accent, and she looks at me and she says, where you going, honey? I said, I want to get to Philadelphia. And she said, Philadelphia? There's a train about to take off right down here. And I reached into my pocket to give her my return ticket, and she looked at me and she said, are you fucking kidding me? We're not collecting tickets today, sweetie. Some things never change in New York. And I went down and I got on that train. That train was packed with people sitting and standing. And you go underneath the Hudson River, through a tunnel, and you come up on the Jersey side, and you look back at what once was the greatest skyline in all the world, now relegated to a gray and black cloud. How sad. How sad. And you're in this train. It's an 80-minute trip down to Philadelphia, and people sitting, people standing, just crammed. And yet, not a word was spoken. There were no words to say. And I got to 30th Street in Philadelphia, and I got off the train, and I found the rental car in the parking lot that I had. And I made my way up to Northeast Philadelphia to the house that I was born and raised in as a kid, to the house that my parents lived in at the time. And I got to tell you, especially you guys, love your mothers. Love your mothers. I got to the front of the house, parked the car, and there's my mom up on the stoop. She comes down and she grabs a hold of me and gives me this big, giant bear hug. She pats my bald head and she sobs, my baby, my baby. I didn't have the heart to remind her that I was the oldest. But my mom did for me at that moment what she's been doing for me and continues to do for me to this day. She helped me and she loved me. And that's what I needed at that moment, was my mother's love. And she helps me into the house, and I hit the floor in front of the television, and I passed out. I don't know, mental exhaustion, physical fatigue, whatever. And I pass out, and at about 2 in the morning, I feel this kick in my side. Rub my eyes, push my glasses back. I look up. My father's hovering over me, and he said, "Well, aren't you ever going to bed?" And I went, "Oh, shit, I'm 17 again." But I did what he told me. I went up the steps, got a few hours of sleep, woke up early the next morning. I wanted to get back to Aurora, Illinois, where I lived at the time. And I called the office to let them know that I wasn't going to be in. And it was a good thing, because they thought I was dead. And I started to make that 14-hour trip back to Aurora, Illinois. I did it in 11 and a half hours, so if any of you are law enforcement, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to get home. And this was before national plans, rollover minutes, whatever we have on our cell phones now. But I didn't care. I wanted to reach out and touch somebody, and they wanted to reach out and touch me too. And it felt good. It felt good to communicate. I know I went over my minutes that day, but I didn't care. And I had called my wife for about the 50th time when I was about 10, 15 minutes away from home. And I said, "Hon, I'm almost there, 10, 15 minutes away." And she said, "Okay." I said, "You have something better to do. Sounds like you're preoccupied." She said, "No, listen, they're having a mass at Our Lady of Mercy Church." And I said, Stop. It's a good day to go to church. I'll be there. I'll meet you there." And I pulled down Eola Road to the church parking lot, and you would have thought it was Christmas. There was no room at the inn. That place was packed. And I don't know whether I was more afraid the day before or the moment I opened up the back doors of that church to see those hundreds of pairs of eyes all staring back at me. And I looked over to the right, to the pew where we always sit. We're Roman Catholics. We always sit in the same pew, okay? And there's my wife, a couple of my kids, my friends. My wife, she isn't here today. She'll never be at one of these things. She's extremely quiet, non-demonstrative, hates this story. And to see this quiet woman jump over the back of that pew and run to the back of that church and give me the greatest hug and a kiss that a man could ever want, I knew at that moment that I was home. I was home. And so, that's how the story goes. There are so many concepts and lessons learned in that story that it's almost impossible to recap them all. But when it comes to decisions and decision-making, The key lessons are pretty clear. Every decision is important, no matter how big or no matter how small one may seem. A decision can change your life and the lives of others in ways way beyond that which you can ever imagine. The information, the resource, and the trust of your source that you bring to a decision-making process determines the strength and accuracy of that decision for better or for worse. And most importantly, making the right decision is not easy. It is not easy. But if you trust yourself, if you trust your gut, if you trust your resources, your heart, your mind, your soul, you can make a critical decision that can have tremendously successful results. I'm here today, alive and fortunate to be able to share all of this with you because of a series of decisions made in the most critical of situations. However, you don't need to be in a flaming high-rise office building on the 105th floor during a terrorist attack to be that effective, to be that successful. You can be in a beautiful resort on a beautiful fall day in Pinehurst, North Carolina, and by making the right decisions, you can have positive and lasting effects on your peers and partners, helping them and you to improve and maybe even saving the lives of others. I don't do this to feel good. God knows recanting this story again and again only breaks my heart over and over. I don't do it for fame or notoriety, nor do I do it for monetary gain. I don't accept payment for my presentations. I do this because I believe, as a person who's been part of a historic event, it is my obligation, it is my duty to tell the story, to give a voice to the 3,000 who lost their own voices that day, so that they once more can be heard, and to allow their spirits so senselessly dashed that day to rise again and let those spirits soar, reminding us that while their lives may have been lost, they were not lost in vain. And while I seek no compensation, I do ask for payment from each and every one of you in one way and in one way only. To always remember and to never, never forget. God bless Nickel Jesus. God bless North Carolina. And God bless America. Thank you.
So he said he would answer a few questions if there is any. I know I want to run home and hug my wife and kids real quick. But if we do have any questions, raise your hands if you have any. Yep, Nanu?
Joe, I think that's very powerful what you do, and some of the things that we do each and every day, supporting public safety. It's only a small part of what you did that day. You seem to remember vividly every moment, every minute, from the top to the bottom. I just wanted to know how long it took you from the top to safety as far as total minutes, if you can remember that. With all
Exactly.
the...
I know exactly, and just interestingly, that's usually always the first question that gets asked. It's amazing. I've been doing this for 12 years, and it was 50 minutes. We know what time the plane hit our building, and for some ironic reason, the minute I walked out of the building and got across the street with Duffy, I looked at my watch, and it was exactly 50 minutes, 5-0. That's a long, long time. It's a long trek down 105 flights of steps. Go ahead.
You say it's long, but I'm sure during that time it seemed very short.
No, it didn't seem short. It seemed like for friggin' ever. Because there was that part of you that didn't know what was going on, and that was okay. But then there was that part of you that didn't know what was going on, and it wasn't okay. And so, your butthole shrinks up, and you're like, I want to get out of here. I want to get out of here. And you couldn't run, like I had mentioned before. You couldn't run. And then when the cops and the firefighters started going up in the other direction, it slowed our progress out. And the whole time, I mean, we were 8 minutes out of the building. 8 minutes when that thing came down. That close. That close. There got to be other questions, because the nun that told me that it was okay to hate New York also used to say there are no such thing as dumb questions. Well, there actually are, but that's okay. It doesn't matter.
That's funny, because I'm a native New Yorker, so I was waiting to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Thank you
You're quite welcome.
for sharing your story. Thank you for making it real and vivid. I was living in North Carolina, but I went to high school the opposite direction from where you were in Tribeca. So I went to those towers every day. My father was a conductor on the trains, so I knew all those tunnels. I knew all those signs you were talking about. And not to be more gruesome, but I know that that number of 3,000 is very low.
Oh, yeah.
For how many people work every day under the buildings.
They estimated at one point in time, and you might remember this, while we were there in that apartment watching, they started estimating 12, 13, 14,000 people could have been dead at that particular point in time. Those were the original numbers. Right. And we were just flabbergasted. And you're right, with all those people that were in that area, and like I said, they were guessing as many as 25,000 in one building.
Right.
It was incredible.
I guess it's a question, but it's more of a, how do you feel about it? What I got from what you said as far as decision-making and decisions, the balance of protocol and purpose. And at a certain point, New York is as arrogant as we can be. Protocol turned off and purpose turned on. And did you sense that throughout the event, or did it come and go? I kind of heard it coming and going at certain points, but...
Now, I got to tell you that there was no doubt in my mind that purpose overrode protocol from almost the minute that building got hit, our building got hit. There was no doubt in my mind that anybody that we saw that was in a position of authority wasn't saying, okay, this is what the book says. They were saying, get the hell out of this building and let's do it quickly because this is what we need to do. And I tell people all the time, and listen, from Philly, we have fun making fun of people from New York because New Yorkers have fun making fun of people from Philly. And I tell people all the time, it couldn't have happened in a better place. And people go, oh my God, what do you mean? Because those people there that day, they weren't afraid. They weren't scared. They weren't upset. They were pissed off. They were so mad that somebody would have the guts, the gall to do this to their city. You knew that things were going to be okay. You just knew. When we got out of that building and we got on that street, we knew that we were going to be okay. I mean, every one of those public servants, every one of those non-public servants were like, go this way, do this, get out of here, do that. There was no question. There was no doubt. And there was no doubt that there was going to be a recovery. And there was no doubt that there was going to be rescues. And there was no doubt that they were going to make their way back from it. And an amazing, there isn't a doubt in my mind that everybody's attitude towards New York and New Yorkers changed instantly that day. And I truly do love New York. I truly do. Other questions? Go ahead. Have I been back? Yeah. I have to. Business takes me there, okay? It's the heart and soul of the insurance industry down there, so you have to go back. The first time I went back, though, was about 7 months after to do that thing with USA Today and ABC News. And I got the chance to meet Barbara Walters that day. She's the one that asked me the questions and did the interview. It was kind of neat. She's a really, really nice person, which I didn't think she was. And she asked me, could I do anything for you? And I said, yeah, I think I want to go back. I didn't need to tell her where. She knew exactly what I meant. And she got Port Authority cops to take me down there. Probably the second scariest day of my life, because if you remember, they had a big ramp that went down into the pit. And they let me walk down the ramp, and my knees were just shaking. And I went back, and I had some things that I wanted to leave there for some of the friends that I had lost that day. This big burly construction guy, he didn't know who I was. He didn't really know what was going on, but he came over and he handed me 4 bolts that he had just sheared off a piece of steel that had been crushed. And he said, here, these are for you. You need these. And I happened to come down with 2 guys and go out with Duffy, and I happened to have 4 bolts. So we all got those as mementos of that day. I got to tell you then, the second time I went back was about a year and a month after the event, and it was on business. And they didn't know, and they put me up in the Millennium. The Millennium's right across the street from Ground Zero, and all the windows in the Millennium face one way, towards Ground Zero. And I walked into that hotel, and I thought, no way, I can't stay here. I called my wife. She said, go someplace else if you have to, but maybe you ought to just try. So I went downstairs, and it was almost midnight, and I walked around what was the Ground Zero site at that time, which was really just a bunch of metal fences and scaffolding and plywood walls. And while the new memorial is beautiful, and I encourage everybody to go there, and when the museum gets done, it'll be even greater. When I walked around that night, and I looked at those plywood walls, and I saw stuff all written over them in Sharpie pen, notes like, I miss you, Daddy. I love you, Mommy. That was Ground Zero. That was Ground Zero. There's a part of me that wishes that the Port Authority would have said, you know what, we're going to leave it just the way it is, to remind everybody of what happened here. They have their right to do what they did and build a new building. I can tell you one thing, I'm not going in that building. I've done my share. But I really highly encourage anybody who can go back to go back. It may take a little piece of your heart, but it's not a bad thing.
You mentioned there was a group of you in your meeting, and it's making it a little personal. The decisions we made, the little ones, the big ones, how many in your group made it out that day?
There were 54 people in the room, 7 of us survived. And before you ask the follow-up, because you're good at follow-up, and I like it, not one of the 7, except for me, talk about this. Survivors are weird. And if you were in the service, especially if you were in the service during Vietnam, this will definitely hit home. You see things and you experience things that you shouldn't have experienced. And so survivors, for the most part, don't want to talk about it. I don't blame them. I really don't blame them. And people say, oh, you and those 6 other people must have a great camaraderie. I haven't talked to most of them in 8, 9 years. They don't want to talk. I had the chance to be on Oprah. I lived in Chicago, or a Chicago suburb at that time. So 10 days after the event, her people found me out. I had no intention on going. I had teenage daughters at that time. They looked at me and they said, we've been trying to get tickets since we lived here in Chicago. You got to go on, Dad. And so I went on to Oprah. And, it was interesting. They asked a lot of questions about that. And they asked a lot of questions about, what do you do? I mentioned at that point the name of one of the guys that survived the meeting with me. He called me the next day screaming at me. He said, national television, you mentioned my name. I said, yeah, but you survived. He said, I told my mother. This guy was 10 years older than me. I told my mother that I wasn't in that building. And you told her that I was. It's a different mindset. It's a totally different mindset. For me, the talking is catharsis, and it does me some good to do it. I think I don't know where I'd be if I didn't do it, so.
Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. Yes. Hang on one second.
Did your buddy's friend or his wife make it out of the North Tower?
Do you know what? I'm so glad you asked me that. Did my buddy Duffy's wife make it out? It's one of the best stories I get to tell when somebody asks. Duffy lived in this condo on the Upper West Side. And after we departed, he got up there. And when he got to the condo, the door was locked. Him and his wife always left the door open when they were home. So the door was still locked. So he is thinking, oh my God, she's not home. So he puts the key in the lock. He was almost afraid to open the door. He pushes it back. He said, maybe a couple of inches. And he looks through the great room and into the kitchen. And there's Michelle. And what then proceeded to happen was one of the greatest chick flick moments ever. She comes running from the kitchen. He comes running through the door. They meet in the middle of the room, fall in a big ball of hugs and kisses and crying and blah, blah, blah. And right in the middle of all this, she pushes him back and she goes, well, where the hell have you been? And I said, see, same shit all the time for husbands, you know? Unbelievable. Unfortunately, Duffy and Michelle are no longer a couple, but they remain greatest friends despite the fact that they couldn't be married anymore. And they both claim that that moment and that circumstance is what will always keep them to be greatest friends. I love that story. I love that story.
Anything else? All right. Well, let's give Joe one more round of applause. Thank you.